Hi, Rachel.
I'll unmute myself.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, good. Not too bad. I've had two meetings straight up, and it's like straight into it this morning. How you
Yeah,
doing?
yeah. Mine's actually been a little bit. I'm just adjusting my screen. My day's been a little bit a slower start, which is nice. But yesterday was crazy. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that
Must
happens.
be getting a lot of people reaching out at the moment.
Yeah, it's been the whole time. We've been pretty steady, really. We haven't. It's been busy the whole time, pretty
Same.
much. Yeah.
Yeah. My
I think
life hasn't really changed.
no, people need help all the time, really, and
Yep.
in the same situation. So yeah, the only thing that's changed for us is the telehealth component. So we are providing telehealth, which is working really well.
Yeah. And probably the fact that you're doing it online like me rather than face to face.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
were going
Same.
to go back we were going to have a return this week.
Yeah.
But we just thought because of the, not that we're in Melbourne, but because of the, the recent sort of spike and recommendations to consider continue working from home or remotely or whatever, if you are, we just continue with that. So
Yeah.
we notice a lot of clients are pretty anxious coming out and sitting in a session for a long period of time anyway. So they much prefer the being on the other side of the screen, I think. So they're
Look.
preferring it. So
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah, and I think everyone's just adjusting so well to the whole new thing, aren't they?
mm, no.
Yeah, yeah.
So now we've
Getting
got this, which we'll talk about, we've got this reverse culture shock, which is that coming back out and people have settled into their little, honeymoon stages where they
Yep,
are. And now it's like, oh,
yep.
and I think more so I've noticed with kids going back to school, which has been good to go back to school, but they've struggled a little bit they were in their little comfort zone. So they've
Same.
struggled. Mm,
My kids. Yeah, yeah. And not the worst part, but they finish on Friday. They
yeah.
get well, my kids get 3 weeks off because they're at the grammar, so they have 3 weeks as opposed to other kids 2 weeks.
Yes.
So they're going to be back home for 3 weeks and then they're going to go back again. So, but anyway, they were better off going back to school.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I think
funny.
so. It's funny though, isn't it?
It's funny how adaptable we are.
I
Yeah,
agree. I agree. And I think the schools did an amazing job trying to juggle everything, over that whole course of it's been pretty tricky for them to get all online, and the teachers did an amazing job. And I think there's a new level of gratitude for teaching staff. I think
well, yeah, my kids, because at the grammar they got onto it the week before we all the
yeah,
week.
they're very proactive, aren't they? They got
Well,
on.
they had classroom like this, like we're doing. Every
Oh,
single classroom was on Zoom. So my kids would go to school 9 o'clock in the morning, sitting in front of the computer till 3:20. They'd have their recess and lunchtime, and every classroom was in Zoom.
oh, that's really good, isn't it?
Yeah, so they were all over that the week before the end of term one. Is that term
Yes.
one? Yeah. So they went home on the Tuesday doing that.
Mm,
So it was easy for me because I
yeah.
didn't have to homeschool or anything.
That's it.
Yeah, April's year 10 and Lucas is grade 6. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would just worry about them sitting in front of a screen all day. That was the only thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at least when they go to school, they're moving around, they're getting around, they're walking, they're doing all that sort of stuff. Whereas at home, they just were sitting the whole time.
Yeah, that's true. I think some were doing a shorter day, starting earlier and finishing a bit earlier, and just,
Yeah.
but it's still, yeah, you're right, a lot of sitting.
And they sit anyway. Like
We
it's not
do.
like in my day where all we did was we were outside the whole time.
Yeah.
They sit anyway. So and then to sit for school for 6 hours a day as well is like, oh my
Right,
God.
a lot. And I know the teachers were even saying that sitting, delivering them, because they're used to walking around and doing their,
Yep.
bits and
Yeah,
pieces.
and we underestimate the little things where when you go to school, you're walking from classroom to classroom, you walk outside and have your break with your mates, you're hanging around, all the simple little things we sort of
Yeah,
take for granted. But
we do. Yeah.
anyways,
Anyway, it'll be
um,
interesting to see what happens next. But anyway, I'm pleased that the school holidays are still going, like they're not putting a stop on sort of travel, well, at the moment anyway, to
yeah,
some
I
degree.
know. Yeah.
Bit of a worry in Melbourne in some
It's
of the
mainly Melbourne, isn't it?
yeah, particular parts. So my folks are in Melbourne, but they're in Nillumbik Shire, so they're this side. So they're not in Hume or Casey but there's particular hotspots in certain
Where's
areas.
the hot spots?
So Hume is like, you know, Campbellfield and Somerton, Faulkner, that kind of area.
Yeah.
And then down Werribee way as well,
Yep.
Hoppers Crossing, that sort of
Yep.
way. Keilor Downs, that kind of area.
Ooh.
So and around Essendon sort of area, Meaty Pond. So there's, I think, about 4 different shires that are impacted on with having clusters, which they've said are mostly, well, there's 3 sources. They said family, a family cluster from a family, and then the GP that was unwell that might have been Brighton, I think, maybe. Yeah, anyway, and infected, I think, 12 or 14 patients, but there's possibly more.
Oh my God.
And then the third one was a person from the protest, the Black Lives Matter, went into H&M and he or she was infected. And then, so there's sort of 3, yeah.
Went into the store H&M.
Went into the store H&M and was, yeah. So because not everyone, I mean, I'm not against the protesting and all that, but I think...
I'm not either, but I don't think it was a good time. Yeah.
And it shouldn't have gone ahead in a pandemic. No. They could have done it virtually, or, you know, there would have been other forums they could have protested, I think.
Agreed. They put too many people at risk doing that.
So that's put all of those sorts of things, I think, have put everyone backwards a bit. Well, Melbourne's gone backwards a bit. And now there's been, now, you know, the panic buying has occurred again.
Yeah, I know. I saw it on telly last night. What is wrong with people?
Yeah. Well, when I talk about my thing today, yeah, like it's a coping style. So very important.
Is it?
Yeah, it's a particular coping style that people try to do to gain control over a situation that's out of their control.
Okay, so just quickly.
Yes.
You're able to share your screen or not? Let's check that, because you'll want to do that. Yeah. And I will also oh, hang on, is this recording already?
Host disabled participant screen.
So no, I won't do that. Just hang on, let me see if I can just bear with me.
That's fine.
I haven't done anything, really. Multiple participants can share simultaneously. Hang on.
I think if you go into...
I'm just going to go all.
Yeah.
We can start sharing when someone else is sharing. Just try that now.
Yep, I think that's going to work. Just bring that up.
Oh, very good. So beautiful.
And then I'll bring it up onto the other part.
So do it where you do it. Oh, this heater. Oh, so cold. Oh, beautiful.
Good.
So what we'll do is I will just bear with me. I need to get that up here. I will introduce you. I'll just welcome everyone. Most people, you know, will probably start around, give them 5 minutes or so. Just going to pull up are you happy just for me to read your bio?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't think I sent you an updated one, but the one you had that's fine.
That's okay. Let me just pull up. Yeah. So I'll read that bio. I'll just welcome everyone to our first webinar series.
Exciting.
Well, we've got to do something.
Yeah.
So I'll just talk about the 7 steps to managing anxiety in uncertain times. I kind of, for the purpose of, you know, marketing it, I sort of summarize that. When the map is not the territory, 7 steps to manage anxiety and uncertainty in an uncertain world. I just kind of, if that was okay. So
yeah, it was fine. What you did was fine. That's completely fine. Do you want me to share my screen at the start, or do you want me to just have it as everyone and then share the screen, or are you happy just to have the screen up?
I haven't thought about any of this, to be quite honest.
When they'll join, what will happen, Tracy, is they'll just see the little parts of you.
Yeah.
Like tiles.
Yeah.
So if I stop sharing, if you want them to see bigger, then they'll see us and then when it's shared screen, like we'll go as hosts up into a little tile that
we might start off with just you and I.
Yeah.
And then when you're ready, then you'll share the screen, just so when they come in, they can just see us, I guess, is a good thing.
Yeah.
And the chat, so I do want them to, they've just got to click on the chat, don't they? So it comes up on their screen.
Yeah, so with the chat box, they should be able to, well, have you got the options of asking a question? Have you got Q&A, like an asking a question? Did you set this up as a webinar or a Zoom meeting?
Zoom meeting.
Okay, because it's not set up as a webinar, which is completely fine. What you'll have is they won't be able to do the Q&A, which is fine. They can just put the comments into the chat.
Yep. And I can see them. I'll try and manage that. So the next one, I didn't know, Rachel. So I can go in and set up a webinar, can I?
Set it up as a webinar, because then it's easier when you're trying to look through all the questions. Well, I mean, at least you're there, but if you're one person running it, it's very difficult with the chat, because then you have to go through and read everything, and you can miss, you can scroll, but you can kind of miss stuff.
Yeah.
So,
okay, I'll keep that in mind. Thank you. I didn't.
No, that's fine. And they can also raise their hand as well. So there is a part where, there's reactions where they can give you thumbs up or whatever, but so the more as they go into the chat, which a lot of them will probably know, but in terms of questions, I mean, it's up to you. I'm happy just to track through and then do questions at the end.
I think at the end's better. I don't think it's fair that you're interrupted. You're in a state of flow, and you're speaking. So I always think it's better to have questions at the end.
Yep.
So how long do you think we will?
Well, probably
you'll run for.
I think it'll go for a fair period of time. Like because you've got what's the time allocation you've got?
I've got 12 to 1:30. Just let me double check that. Yeah, it's 12 to 1:30, and that's what's on the EDM.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long do you reckon you'll take? Will it be about an hour? So
it'll be within the hour, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that will give us a fair bit of time for Q&A.
Yep.
And we'll go from there. I think that might be a good thing. So everything's working well. Your microphone's working well. It's already recording. I must have put it on automatic recording, but I wanted to record it. So actually, should I just, we are recording now. So welcome to our Wow Women first live webinars, if you like, as part of COVID-19 2020. What a year so far. Interesting to say the least, but like most memberships and businesses and people that love to connect. And yes, I'm very tactile, but I can't do that at the moment. So this is our next best option. I was just saying before how fortunate we are that we do have this technology, because if we didn't, we would really have no other option. So we've got to look on the bright side of things, and where there's a will, there's a way. So here we are. And our first wonderful presenter, Rachael Willis, who has been a Wow Woman from day one. She is a founding member, and she's presenting today on the 7 steps to managing anxiety in uncertain times. So I thought that would be an incredible topic to start with. Just a little bit about Rachael. And I'm sure most of you have met Rachael throughout the years in our workshops, our dinners, our one-day events, and our cocktails. But on an official basis, Rachael Willis is a clinical psychologist, and she is the principal of Pure Empowerment Psychology in Shepparton. Rachael is a psychology board approved clinical supervisor as well, and she's been practicing in her profession for 20 years. So a lot of credibility there. Rachael specialises in the area of empowering people across their lifespan, and she helps clients to understand their behaviours and change their lives for the better. And this is why we need Rachael to speak to us today, particularly. In 2018, Rachael launched Equine Empowerment, an equine assisted psychotherapy program that assists people to work outside with horses using the EAGALA model, which you might at the end let us know what that is. But I remember Rachael speaking about this, I think it was one of our cocktails, and how she had created this groundbreaking new way of helping people. And it was really exciting at the time. And now we're 2 years in. It'd be lovely to get some feedback on that. Rachael is a local person and her husband is also in real estate. Welcome, Rachael Willis. I will leave the floor to you if you want to share your screen and commence. That would be lovely. Round of applause for Rachael.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. I'm just going to fiddle with my little PowerPoint here. Get this going. So hopefully you can see my screen. Okay, thumbs up. Hopefully it's all okay. Excellent. So welcome today to well, the first Well Women's group for this year. And as Tracy said, it's challenging times. So this is called on to be quite innovative. So with these times, we've obviously, oops, I'll just go back on that one. We've obviously had to be quite creative with how we run these groups. So what I wanted to do was be able to present something on dealing with anxiety, because we're in the current climate. It's quite a challenge in terms of adapting to what's been happening, and particularly sitting with uncertainty. So I'll talk a little bit about me. So thanks for the introduction, Chase. That was lovely. So I've been working here in Shepparton as a psychologist. I relocated here about 9 years ago now. I was formerly from Melbourne, and prior to that time, I had a bit of time in between. I was in country Victoria up in Yarrawonga, Mulwala. So I'm in a very small private practice in Shepparton where I have set up a bit of a training clinic where I actually have young graduates, interns coming out of university that they're completing their psychology internships, so that I take them on and offer them a bit like an apprenticeship. So they do like a 2-year stint, or it might be a 12-month stint if they've done higher studies such as masters and things like that. I guess, what do I provide? So as Tracy alluded to, back in 2018, I decided that office-based treatment isn't for everyone, and that's because it's very hard sometimes to engage people to come and see a psychologist. A lot of people don't want to come into an office. They feel there's a stigma. So basically, I went and did some training with, and it's called IGALA. So IGALA is Equine Assisted Group and Learning Association. So they're American-based. They come out to Australia once a year. So I did some training with them because I was wanting a model that was evidence-based, didn't involve horse riding as such, because there's a whole level of liability with that and participants, but ground-based. It was a team approach, so it involved myself as a mental health professional and also a equine specialist. So I have an equine specialist working with me, her name's Stacey Towers, and she's also my receptionist slash PA slash all-rounder. And so since that time in 2018, we've actually rolled out, I think we've provided over 200 individual sessions. We've presented at Equitana, which is quite a big horse event in Melbourne at the Exhibition Centre. And we're also invited to present at the IGALA International Conference in Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky. Unfortunately, this was at the start of the year and we had a thing called bushfires occurring. It's been one of those years. So we were impacted where our farm is. We're down towards Euroa where our farm is. So unfortunately, we weren't able to leave our farm. It was a little bit, we were safe, but it was a little bit scary at that point in time to leave. So I was still able to do a video presentation to that international conference. And I think that's the first, Australian psychologist to present at something of that size. So yeah, we're certainly trying to wave our flag over here in Australia and Victoria to really put IGALA on the map as an additional therapy offering to people. And so my why is all about empowerment. That's hence the name, Pure Empowerment Psychology. My job is to empower people to be the best version of themselves. So people come to me and they have their own solutions to their issues. They sometimes don't realise that. But my job is to help guide people through that. So I see people, as Tracy said, right across the lifespan. So why this workshop? So obviously to connect and reconnect with fellow WELL members. So it's awesome to see so many people here today, because I know it's difficult to get to meetings and it's difficult to even navigate the technology. So well done with all joining through Zoom. And I'm sure a few of you would have learnt a little bit about technology now since we've been in this current climate. I guess also want to cover there's been a lot of terms that have been described. So same storm that we're in terms of COVID-19, but we all are in a different boat. So I want to really validate and normalise this, because it's not the same for everyone. We're here, we're all in this together. Yes, we are all in this together, but it's a different boat that we are all on. We are all in different situations. We work in different situations. We're impacted on differently, and we have different coping styles, which I want to talk a little bit about. And the other thing is obviously uncertainty, which is something none of us like to really sit with. It's required us to pivot and even pirouette, for us to continue to survive. So whether it's your business, whether it's your family, whether it's your schooling, whether it's your work, whatever it might be, it's all required us to pivot and become very innovative in terms of to be able to survive through this unprecedented time sort of thing. And how we cope during this is really important, because there's a few stages to coping. And as people are probably aware of, unfortunately over the weekend, there's been some other developments in Victoria. So that's challenged. I was just saying to Tracy before we joined, it's interesting how some people have gone back to reverting to behaviours like stockpiling toilet paper. So as a coping response, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it seems there's been a little bit of a regression back into how people are coping with this current climate. So with the workshop and the expectations, we're looking at sort of exploring when the map is not the territory. So I'm sure all of you had a bit of a plan for what this year might look like for yourself. So we call that the map. And maybe you planned some holidays, maybe you planned where your business direction was going, or whatever it might be. And unfortunately, the map is not what the territory actually is. In fact, there's a big reality gap between where we thought we might be and where we actually are at this point in time. And in that space, that's not always a negative, and I'll talk a bit more about that, but it's certainly a different map than what we had in mind. We'll also look at the 7 steps or strategies to manage anxiety and uncertainty, and help you identify your coping style and reflect on whether this is serving you. Because the reality is we all cope, but it's how. And some of our coping styles can serve us, and some actually don't serve us very well. And if we think of the current climate as a bit like a marathon versus a sprint, we need to sustain as much energy as we can to get through this and out the other side. So the expected outcomes, understanding your coping style, and if this is helping you or hindering you, learning the 7 practical steps to manage anxiety and the what ifs and worry, because we all have anxiety. This is a normal part. This is the alarm center of our brain. So we're not about getting rid of anxiety. We're about how do we manage this. But in particular, what ifs and worry, and particularly, there's real worry and then there's hypothetical worry, and they're 2 different things. So, and obviously try to increase your resilience going forward and reduce what we call the control agenda, which is often quite high when a situation's imposed upon us. If there's any people who like controlling things out there, and I'm one of those people, we have to learn to be able to be aware of what we can control and what we can't. And sometimes our control agendas actually make things worse for us. So if we look at the stages of COVID-19, so we've sort of got pre, during, and post. So we sort of consider ourselves at the moment in what's probably called the 3rd stage, which is the many people have referred to it as reintegration. So what we're talking about here, I'm not sure if people have heard of this term, reverse culture shock. So when we initially went into the 1st stage, when it was back in whatever date it was announced as a pandemic, around, let's say it was the 12th of March or something thereabouts, initially there was a culture shock sort of reaction. And then we sort of went into what's called a honeymoon phase, because we adapted to some degree. And then we obviously are now on the other stage where we're actually coming out of, and it's a reverse culture shock, because we're trying to now reintegrate ourselves into something that has changed. Now, if you've been overseas before, if you've ever been, if anyone's ever been in a military situation, they've been deployed and they return home, the homecoming is different for each and every one of it. It's different. What we come back to is not what we've left. The world has changed since we've been in isolation, since we've been away from maybe working from home. It's not the same place we're coming back to. And so we have this concept of reverse culture shock, which people may have heard a bit about that. So it's a feeling you may have when you get back, you know, from living overseas. It's particularly severe among particular populations that are returning. So people who've been on expeditions and things like that. So the term is after the joy of reunion, the slog of reintegration. And so Tracy and I were talking a little bit about just at the moment how tired everyone's feeling, exhausted. So this is quite common that in this stage of reverse culture shock, that we're actually feeling the slog of reintegration, you know, reintegrating into a changed world, which we know we need to reintegrate. We don't know how long this reintegration phase is going to last for, but it's obviously going to last for a reasonably period of time, practically, financially. So there was a couple of psychologists in the US that actually talked about this back in the 1960s. So it dates right back to as far as the 1960s in terms of homecoming and the more ups and downs in terms of readjusting to what was once familiar. So this is what it sort of looks like in a curve. It's called a reverse shock W curve. So it looks like a W. So your normal period of, you know, initial crises happening, then we obviously have a bit of a phase there. We have recovery and adjustment, and the honeymoons. When we came home, we sort of recovered. But now we've got this, so that's the start of the crises, and then we've got the second phase now, the third phase, which is reintegration. So that's that culture shock sort of comes into this part, the reverse side of that. And now with another, when it's not, we don't know if it's exactly another wave, but in terms of spike in Victoria, there could be actually another period of this sort of coming along. So it is really like a roller coaster. And for most of you may have experienced, some days you feel, yep, I've got this, I think I'm going okay. And then other days you're just floored and you just feel, I'm not okay. You know, this is really quite difficult on many levels. And I'm sure you would have seen that with maybe some of your family members or peers, colleagues. It's been a very, very up and down roller coaster kind of situation. So looking at change and how we adapt. So there's generally three main points to consider when we're changing and adapting. So obviously there's home, work life has changed. You have changed. Now this is quite significant. It's amazing how many people have changed during this period of time. And of course we're not stagnant, we will change, but it's quite interesting the amount of change that people have adapted and sometimes for the better during this period of self-isolation, and they want to continue these things post. So there's been some positive parts in that respect as well. So then when you're returning obviously back from working from home, if you were working from home, some of you may not have been working from home, so it was business as usual to some degree or unusual. We're still needing to now readapt to what is so-called the new normal. And, you know, there's been many terms, hasn't there, that have been sort of the new normal. You know, there's lots of terms that have been used around this period of time as all trying to, I guess, validate our experience. So the effects of the reverse culture shock. So it does actually put us into a state of not just initial acute stress. So when you think about when we initially have a stressor coming along, generally how our brain and our body is wired is to deal with the stressor in terms of fight or flight response. And obviously there's an increase of what's called cortisol steroid stress hormone. And generally we'll then be able to go back into rest and digest system and we're back online. With unfortunately a chronic stressor, so we're not quite, what are we now? Yeah, it's not quite chronic, so it's not 6 months or more, but we've definitely gone through that definite phase of the first 4 weeks, which is that adjustment disorder that we all would have gone through. And then we get into that honeymoon phase, but now it's sort of stretching out a bit more to become more chronic, which means that that's where we're all starting to feel the effects of all of those stress hormones going along. So some of the effects that people can experience with reverse culture shock is, there's a number, I've just got them outlined down here. So I've mentioned the exhaustion, feeling marginalised, resistance, even some self-doubt and depression can occur. Okay, so coping with coping. So how are you coping? Well, how am I coping with coping, right? So what are the coping styles? I'll put copy, sorry about that. We all cope, but how? Okay, so we all do cope. So one of the classic ones that we notice is called avoidance. Okay, now avoidance is employing any particular behaviour that's not going to make a difference to the virus or a difference to your safety. So that could explain, for example, the toilet, buying behaviours, so that people think that by stockpiling particular things, that's going to help them. That's something that's in their control, which you can go and buy. That's in your control, but it really doesn't make a difference to the actual stressor as such. But most people will do either buying behaviours, drinking behaviours, spending behaviours. There's been a lot of online buying and things like that. And that's possibly because people can't go to the shops as much, but that's really it's increased quite a lot. So there's been a lot of avoidance style. And avoidance is easy, of course, because all of us can engage it if we choose. However, it gives us some relief in the short term, but not in the long term. The other type of coping style is called problem focused, and obviously this one's more probably favourable in terms of versus avoidance. So problem focused is all about actually looking at the problem with wise mind, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about, and actually developing some strategies about what actually is in your control. So such as, what can I do about hand hygiene? What can I do about social distancing? What can I do about reducing the amount of media that I watch, and obviously the reliable sources of media. And the third one is emotion-focused coping. So we really need a bit of both problem-focused and emotion-focused. Emotion-focused is dealing with, so the problem is, let's do the practical strategies, but the emotion-focused part we don't deal with that well, and that's dealing with this unpleasant feeling called anxiety and this unpleasant feeling called uncertainty. So what is uncertainty? Well, it's an unpleasant feeling, as I've talked about. We really dislike it, obviously, because there's two common human emotions we don't like sitting with, we don't like tolerating. One is uncertainty and one is grief. And if you think about both of those processes, they're very similar in terms of roller coaster sort of experience, partly because the level of our helplessness. Obviously, most of us have a high intolerance for uncertainty, and this is the problem. It challenges our control agenda and need for control. So we think that we need to have control of lots of things, and most things are out of our control because control is a bit of an illusion. There are some things in our control, but when a situation like COVID-19 has impacted on us, our control agendas, if you're that way more inclined, tends to actually become, you go into overdrive. So let's look at some 7 steps to assist. So we're going to go through understanding your coping style and intolerance for uncertainty, dropping the control agenda, which you'll already have a control agenda and circle of control. Window of tolerance. This is really interesting. Window of tolerance, the more you can learn a bit about on any given day where you're sitting in your window, that's really key to be able to regulate and get your brain online. So we'll talk a little bit about that, particularly those days where you're not traveling so well, which is quite normal, where you're feeling like, yesterday I was fine, and now today I'm completely offline and I don't know why. Understanding the stress response, and most people have heard a bit about the stress response, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. Being in the moment and mindfulness and compassion, and how important that is in the current climate. Covering your bases, which means routines, body care, achievement, connection, enjoyment, and fun. And then worry control and postponing your worries. So we're not about stopping our worries. That's not useful. It's a paradox. If we try to stop worrying, we worry more. So when you think about coping styles, let's look at those. What sort of coping style do you have? Are you an avoider? Do you overcompensate, or do you surrender? So when you have a worry like this, say this situation with COVID-19, are you trying to avoid it, which would be avoiding thinking about it, talking about it, going and doing other things outside of it? Are you trying to overcompensate for it? Are you buying excessive toilet paper, hand sanitizer? Surrendering would be actually becoming more, so surrender means you're giving into it and you're thinking, I'm helpless, there's nothing I can do. So obviously those 3 coping styles, and we can all relate to avoidance, overcompensation and surrender. We all probably do 1, 2 or 3 of those at times, okay? So if you do like to have control, then you will probably be doing more of what I'll be calling overcompensation, and not probably so much surrendering. And asking yourself, are you problem focused, or are you a very intellectually based person that you like to solve problems? Because some people are more that way inclined, and that's great, but then they intellectualize the problem, which doesn't give you any emotional response and settling. So because we're human beings, we don't just need the intellectual facts. and figures about COVID-19, the stats about how many cases, we need to actually have some way to regulate our emotional response to know that we are going to be okay, all right, in the here and now. So we have this concept called wise mind, which is thinking about being in the here and now. So wise mind is, and I've got a little graph, I think, oops, sorry about my little animations, there we go. So wise mind is actually the space in between emotional mind and reasonable mind. So if you think about that, emotional mind it can be quite reactive to things, but it's also the feeling part of our mind, which is useful in some degree, but it's very fight and flight based. So quite reactive, can lead to impulsivity on decisions, etc. Reasonable mind is the head, you know, you could maybe say that's heart versus head, but the head, and it's based on logic and thought, playing it safe. It can be too cautious sometimes. So obviously the intercept between emotional and reasonable is the space called wise mind. And that's probably what we want to be trying to focus on, is making decisions from our executive functioning, which is here, versus our fight and flight response or intellectual brain. Okay, so dropping the control agenda is so step 2. So control of what? So what are you actually in control of? And I'll show you the slide in a moment. So control agenda is like being stuck in quicksand or a rip. The more you struggle, the more you sink and become exhausted, and your hands aren't free to do anything else. So when you've got a high control agenda, you're fighting against something you can't change, and all your efforts are on something that's completely out of your control. But you think, I'm not doing enough, I've got to try more, and I've got to try more, and that becomes then the problem. With a control agenda too, we often don't accept. Okay, but we have to remind ourselves that in these situations, acceptance doesn't mean like, doesn't equal like. So just because this uncertainty is in our world, it doesn't mean we have to like it, but acceptance is about accepting that this is what's happening right now, but I don't have to like it. People who are stuck in a control agenda are you know, really battling with that concept. They're not willing to accept that this is what's happening. And then struggling with the struggle or struggle switch, we have this other concept that's referred to in acceptance commitment therapy, which is about struggling with the struggle. So it's essentially that quicksand. And also when we're also having this high drop agenda, you know, control agenda, we're also very focused on the what ifs. So what if, and more negative what ifs, you know, what if we're in this situation until there's a vaccine and that's going to be another blah, 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 versus what is in the here and now. So circle of control. So people may have seen some of these images going around, because there has been things going around, which has been quite useful for psychoeducation. And, you know, so what can I let go of? So looking at what I can control is in the middle. So like my positive attitude, turning off the news, limiting my social media, you know, social distancing, etc., etc. And what I can't control over. So, you know, people get very frustrated. I was talking to a psychologist in Melbourne yesterday, and she just reopened her rooms. And I've been doing telehealth for some time now because of COVID-19, and looking at reintroducing face-to-face, but we've still been doing telehealth for the moment. So she was feeling a bit, you know, uneasy. And so she reopened her rooms and thought, okay, I've got everything. And then I think it was one of her first clients she'd seen. For the first day she was open, rang her the next day and said, I think I'm being tested for COVID. So here she was getting, you know, thinking, oh my goodness, you know, so this is the thing, is that she was thinking, you know, what I can control is obviously putting policies in place where people are sick, they don't come along. But what I can't control is unfortunately other people's actions. And so she was furious, you know, that a person's turned up, but you know, so we can't control obviously some of those things, other people's motives, you know, whether people social distance, those sorts of things, even the amount of toilet paper at the store. So that was kind of the step 2. So step 3 is about window of tolerance. And I'm sorry, I'm sort of flying through this time, but window of tolerance is what I talked about before. So when you're having those ups and downs, I guess it's really important to think about, where am I in my window of tolerance right now? So your window of tolerance, if you look at the green, that's where actually we were in our stage of being online. So our executive functioning's online. You know, we feel a sense of being grounded and calm in the current situation. Okay, our mind is curious and open. But what can happen is, if you think of your window of tolerance as just like a band, some people's windows are quite wide. Some people's quite narrow. It's a tolerance sort of area. So it doesn't take much for some people for something small to happen that pushes them up out of their window of tolerance so they can go up into the hyper-aroused, which is fight or flight. And that's when people generally tend to be quite, they can't think clearly. There's the panic, fear, anxiety. So all of us have been thrown upwards out of our window of tolerance, if you like. And if you think about what comes up, we have to try and get it back down. So if we've been thrown upwards, then we actually need to try and use mindfulness and grounding techniques to get us back down. However, some people always throw, sometimes because they've been up for so long and the stress has become quite chronic, they then get into this other response, which is the freeze response. And this is where we can get quite depressed and we can get quite helpless. It's the dorsal vagal. So this is called the polyvagal theory, if anyone wants to look it up. It's quite useful to understand how our central nervous system and everything works in terms of stress. But what's happening then is when we're in this freeze response, is we're so shut down, we're just like this, they call it the feigned death response. You can't do much, so you're immobilized. So I just say to people, often think of yourself as just checking in 3 times a day. Where am I at the moment? Do I feel like I'm centered on, you know, and not all of us can be centered at all times, of course, but do I feel like I'm online? Or do I feel like I'm more hyper aroused? Because if I'm hyper aroused, I need to find some grounding techniques to get myself down, whether that's just a very quick square breathing or box breathing technique, which they used to train the Navy SEALs in to, you know, before they went into combat. So a box breathing or square breathing, if you look that up, it's just very, very simple. Breathing in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, sort of 4 times. Some people's, you know, watches and things have that breathing app actually on it. But conversely, if you fall down and you're in a freeze response, the best thing to get you unstuck from being frozen is movement. So if we're hyper aroused, we need to think hyper, we need to slow the response down, mindfulness, breathing. If we're shut down, hypo, low, shut down, we need to get movement to bring ourselves back up. Okay, so I always often ask to people, you know, where do you think you are at the moment? Do you think you're more hyper, things are racing a bit, so let's look at finding our way back, you know, to that calm? Or do you feel, I can see if someone is shut down because they're offline, they're just very feigned death, so let's go do some movement. And when I say movement, I'm talking gross body movements. We really need to do, you know, limb movement. So whether it is engaging in some yoga or going for a brisk walk, but using your limbs. Okay, I've pretty much talked to most of that. Yeah, so this is the other interesting thing, and this is what made me really, I was quite interested when remote learning was set up for schools and most kids were offline, out of their window of tolerance, as were parents. And then they've been given all this information, which, you know, the curriculum had to keep going. I guess the interesting thing is we were trying to teach people who were offline and still are offline, okay, to some degree. So there's windows, you know, some people were more online than others. I think in Christchurch, when they had the earthquakes, what they did over there with the schools, they shut the schools down, but they actually, I think with the schools, they didn't actually offer them anything because they thought, no, everyone's in their survival mechanisms right now, learning, they're not able to learn, so we won't give them too much. But you know, every country is different, right? So yeah, so I think, I just said to Tracy before I joined today, I think the schools, teachers did an amazing job, parents, students did an amazing job to try and be online to learn up here when we're pretty much offline in a crisis. So these are the 2 stress responses that often occur. So when you understand that we've got fight or flight, which is an acute response, and that's occurred predominantly in the first 4 weeks of the adjustment phase, sort of post-pandemic announcement. We're sort of now going into what's called more of a chronic stress response. And unfortunately, this is a stage where people feel really tired. You know, this is where burnout, this is the concern, this is where burnout can kind of hit us. So we have to be very mindful about using stress management techniques. So whether it is, and not waiting for a holiday, which we don't know if we can go on as many holidays, of course, because of the climate. So, you know, looking at, you know, mindfulness daily, there's lots of good apps you can get, like Smiling Mind, those sorts of things. Just going for a walk, a mindful walk, just having some time out, you know, to exercise if you can, connect with people. It's all very important. So just being aware of that. And also just even checking, talked to Tracy before the start of this, even just blood tests, like for women, we can be we really need to check. Like I've had a lot of women say, I'm so tired. And I've said, have you had your iron checked or your vitamin D? And they're like, oh, no, I think it's just the COVID-19. Well, it may not be, you know, it could be those things as well. So make sure you go and get your iron or your full blood sort of taken, and just check those levels too, because who knows what's going on there as well. Okay, so being in the moment and compassion and mindfulness. So mindfulness is interesting because it's difficult if you're new to the mindfulness area. It's a difficult. It doesn't come easy to learn mindfulness, is what I'm trying to say. There's a lovely movement called Mindful in May that just took place recently. It's headed up by a doctor in Melbourne. It's got quite a following internationally, actually, and it's got some of the best speakers all over the world join. But I guess the simple thing about mindfulness is being able to practice a mindful based exercise, whether it's actually guided meditation or just sitting and noticing 5 things, like what can I see, what can I smell, what can I hear, what can I taste, what can I touch. You know, 3 minutes a day, 3 to 5 minutes a day makes a massive difference to us being online. So why wait to be thrown out of your window of tolerance? Why not take some time to have a mindful lunch break, you know, drive to work mindfully, wash the dishes mindfully. So mindfulness is just about stopping and noticing what is. It's the what is, not the what if. It's observing and being curious. So you may not like what you see, you observe, but you just be curious about that. So it doesn't involve judgment. It just involves noticing and being open and aware, like a little child would be if they saw on a beautiful doll's house that they've never seen for the first time, and just being in the moment with that and noticing what's there. Use of the senses is really important. And so use of the senses, often we externalize mindfulness to start if we're beginners, because that's easier. And then we start to bring mindfulness to breath and mindfulness to other sensations in our body, like, oh, that's interesting, I'm feeling anxious here, or I'm feeling this in my gut, this sort of, you know, tension. So again, without judgment. Now, the other part with mindfulness, and its component of that, is called compassion. So obviously you can't be judgmental and mindful at the same time, nor can you, because compassionate and mindfulness goes hand in hand. So compassion is all about noticing, you know, with love and kindness, whatever shows up. So whatever shows up in the world, whatever shows up in yourself, you don't have to like it, but we're showing it love and kindness. And not only that, we're also considering the fact that we're human beings. That's very, very important. That we have pain and suffering. And in this moment, may we bring ourselves some peace. So there's sort of 3 ingredients to being compassionate. You know, it's humanity, it's about in this moment, and it's obviously also about bringing ourselves some peace. That we all have pain and suffering. So if people want to do some more in the area, should I say, of compassion, if you write down Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, and Kristen Neff is she's a self-compassion guru. She has a really nice, it's called the self-compassion break, and it's about 5 minutes you can do. You can listen to that, or you can read the script and practice that. And it does involve popping your hand on your heart, because there's research around that too, in terms of showing self-love and kindness. It can be very difficult, again, because most people aren't compassionate. Most people have the inner critic very loud and judgmental, because remember, the inner critic is there to serve to protect us. Unfortunately, the inner critic is not very useful. So I'll just quickly give you an example of that before I go into the next step. So the inner critic could say, let's say you've got a goal around walking, health, and you want to walk this morning and you didn't walk. The inner critic would say, you didn't walk this morning for half an hour, and then it would put a comma, so blah, 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 blah. So it extends something into quite a negative frame, okay? What I suggest to people is start using full stops. So that shuts down the inner critic. So what I mean by that is state it as a fact. I didn't go for a walk this morning, full stop. Don't have to add the comma, therefore, you know, the wheels have fallen off your health and wellbeing plan, or whatever it might be, all right? So if we just state things as what happened, what it is, versus adding extra dialogue, which your inner critic likes to do, that's also very useful. So step 6 is about covering your bases. So bases is about looking at, it's an acronym. So I like it because when people come in to see me, often they'll say, oh, Rachel, I want to work on da 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 da. And that's quite a higher cognitive related issue. Maybe there's some irrational thinking. And I'll just say, that's fine, let's park that there. But what about your bases? Are you covering your bases daily? So what's bases? So body care. Tell me about your body care. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you resting? Are you, keeping up with your appointments, your medical appointments? Are you attending to health? Have you been for your blood tests? So that is very, very important body care, okay? Achievement. What are you doing to give yourself a sense of purpose? How are you spending your time? So whether you're working or studying, whether it's paid or unpaid, doesn't matter. What are you doing each and every day to give you a sense of achievement? Okay. Connection. What are your connections like? How often do you connect with them? And the final one is enjoyment and fun. So when did you last do something for fun, enjoyment? So what I'll ask people to do is I'll get them to record their bases over the course of a week or fortnight. And guess what they come back with? Rachel, I've been working, achievement. I'll say, that's great. So where's the B, where's the C and the E? Or it could be, they've been spending lots of time doing fun things, but not doing other things, achievements, and procrastinating. So I really like the bases. I think it's quite practical. So, covering your bases, if it's not daily, like let's say today was more, and I think of this myself, I think today was more work-based and achievement for me. Tomorrow or later today, I'm going to focus more on connection, body care, or enjoyment, just to balance it out. Okay. So that's quite a useful one, is the bases. So the final step is worry control, or postponing your worries, because of course all of us do worry. So remember, it's not about telling ourselves to stop worrying, because if we tell ourselves to stop worry, we actually worry more. Okay. So people have heard about the white polar bear or the pink elephant, so don't think about the pink elephant, we think about it more. So a worry is a normal thing. We overthink. It's coming from that intellectual brain I was talking about earlier, when you've got emotional and an intellectual mind. And it's advertising stuff to us. Now, some of the advertising is real problems that are happening, like you have a real problem that, whatever it might be. Others are hypothetical worries, that what if this happens? What if that happens? Okay. So if it's a real problem, a factual problem, we say, okay, well, let's try and solve this. Let's use some problem-focused strategies to solve this. And everyone's got their problem-solving models. I like Pooch. I really like Pooch, which is a problem-solving model. So POOCH. So, what's the problem? What are your options? List all your options. Doesn't matter how ridiculous they might sound. Just list them all down. And out of those options, what's the outcome? What's the pros and cons of each? And C for choose. Choose one based on, doing that decision analysis, and then H is for how do you think it'll go, and review it. And if it didn't work, go back and choose another one. The hypothetical worries, how we deal with that is we give ourselves permission to worry, okay? Which is the opposite to what we do is saying stop worrying or try to avoid it. So we set a worry time each day. And what that looks like is you choose, a time of your day. So whether it's, late afternoon, early evening, not too close to bedtime. And you just do, you can have 5 or 10 minutes of just a brain dump of writing down any of the what ifs, no matter how big or small, that might be going through your mind. And then you go through over the list. And then what you're going to do is then try and look at circle of control with them. So what's in my control and what's out of my control with these worries, and the ones that are in my control, I'm going to do some problem solving around. Once you finish that, and obviously this, the way our brain works is interesting, because usually when we then go to bed, we'll then have something pop into our mind, usually early hours of the morning, 3 to 6 a.m. is quite classic, or whatever it might be. So normally we'll just thank our mind for advertising that to us, and that we'll deal with that in tomorrow's worry time at 4 o'clock. Now, if it's still at you, you can always write it down, keep a notepad beside your bed if you need to. Okay. The other thing that I really like to, and I teach people to do, is tag their feelings. So what that means is, if you think about your worry, so let's say worried whether I'll be able to return back to work, or my financial affairs because of this COVID and super and whatever it might be. All right, that's the trigger. That's what I'm worried about. And my response is this, but there's a space in between called our feelings. And it's often not always the trigger that's worrying us the most, as odd as this sounds. It's the feelings that are coming up in between. So I get people to tag all their feelings down about whatever the trigger is that's worrying them. So write them all down. So I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling nervous, I'm feeling, whatever it might be. And I ask people not to think about how they're feeling, to actually scan their body and ask their body, so what's showing up for you about that trigger? What are you noticing in your body? And what feeling is that? And how intense is that out of 10? Oh, Rachel, I'm anxious and I'm feeling it here about 8 out of 10, I'm confused and it's about 9 out of 10. And so then and so usually it starts off with 3 or 4 feelings, and then you just keep going further with it. And you've got a list sometimes of 15 or 20 sort of feelings that are sitting there, all about this particular trigger. All right. So then we look at those feelings and we go, okay, now we've tagged them. Now we've shone a torch on those feelings. So we know when we expose a feeling and we shine a torch on it, it actually dissipates as a byproduct. So we're shining a torch on it. We're looking at it and saying, okay, now we're going to look at all that bunch of feelings all together. And you say you're feeling overwhelmed. Look at all this. So we're normalizing. Is there been any other situations when all of these feelings have shown up for you? Oh, yeah, there was another time that I felt like this, but it wasn't related to maybe obviously COVID or losing money. It was to do with blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay. So now you're responding to not just a current trigger, but it's also another trigger your mind's now selling you. So just getting some perspective over what feelings are being triggered, and they're not always just related to the current issue. They're possibly related to some other times, helps us sort of get a little bit of resolution around that. And then we respond in a way we go, oh, okay, I know how that fits now. So I need to show myself compassion because I'm feeling all of these things and none of these things are wrong about this particular trigger. But now what's happening is my brain might be telling me a story. Here becomes the advertiser again, a story about what's going to happen to me because of this situation or because I'm feeling this way. And so then we want to investigate that story. So what is that story, factual, or is that, do you think that's, if you had to take that story to court, take that thought to court and be cross-examined, would it stand up? Or do you think it's a little bit of advertising? And yeah, so we unpack that. What do you think the real story, or the more, I guess, the rational story might look like? And so we rescript that story. What do you think that would be? What's more likely? And the last question, which is really key, do you think you would survive? Because of all of this stuff and this stuff, do you as a human being think you can still survive? And this is very key, because obviously this message here is we're not going to survive. Living, breathing, that sort of stuff. So we have to be very aware of that it's a threat message that you're not going to survive. So we unpack that, confront that, and yeah, that tends to reduce a bit of that. And then obviously the other thing to think about is resources to help. So this is just generally with COVID, but the World Health Organization. So look at reliable information. I've said to a lot of people, just reduce your media consumption. Nothing against the media, but it just adds to that overwhelm. So you have your reliable sources that you look at, and particularly depending on where you work and where you are, you need to be tuned to particular sources more than others. There's tip sheets available, and I'm happy to send Tracy some that have been put out by the APS. Yeah, and that's pretty much, yeah. But the other resource I didn't list is one another. Like, it's really, really important. I'll stop sharing those slides, but oh, so I'll bring this up too. Sorry, I want to show you this quote. So one another, the resources we provide to each other is unbelievable, I think. And this is why it's great that you've done this today, Tracy, and you're doing these webinars, because we have so many resources we all can share and we can all benefit from. We don't take that for granted. So there's a chap by the name of Viktor Frankl, and he was a Holocaust survivor, and he wrote a very famous book called Man's Search for Meaning. And his quote is this: everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So even though we can't choose this situation, we can choose our attitude. And if anyone's ever read that book, it's amazing, Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if anyone has. I've read it, but it's inspirational man. He was a psychiatrist, Austrian-based, and neurologist born. Yeah. So that's pretty much it from me. So I'll stop sharing this. I'm happy to take any questions or comments?
I'm writing so many little notes here. Rachel, that was brilliant. I was trying to identify some of these things as you were talking through them, and I kept writing things down and thought, okay, so I'm going to sort of throw it to Q&A. But I just wrote a few things down that were incredibly interesting to me about how we cope, our different coping mechanisms. And prior to us commencing the webinar, we were chatting about, and Rachel mentioned that, about the toilet paper again. And it is a coping mechanism, she told me. And I thought, oh my goodness, okay, so that's their way of trying to control their situation. And I am a self-confessed control freak. I admit it. Yes, I have issues. I'm trying to let go, but I'm not doing the toilet paper thing. Control, like overcompensating. I was wondering whether I was trying to identify myself in that, like which one was I. I'm certainly not the put my head in the sand person, but I wonder if I was sort of overcompensating. I love the mindfulness piece. I try really hard. See, all this stuff isn't naturally attuned to me. I'm sort of coming into this as I get older, but mindfulness was incredibly important. And I love the BACE, BACE. I love that. And yes, I'm probably the one that was going to come back with achievement, and I've treated myself like shit. Just saying. So yeah, I think we'll open it to Q&A. But what I just want to say is those resources I will get Rachael to share with me, and I will pop it either in an email or however we can do that. And also the title of that book and the author, that would be fantastic. I will certainly make sure I get those to all participants. But if I could open it up to Q&A now, we're doing great. We're just on the hour, 1 o'clock. We've got till 1:30. So I'm going to open it up. I'm pretty sure you can unmute yourself. So who would like to go first? Don't be shy. This is your chance to ask questions. Remember, this is a safe space.
I have a question. So I feel through this whole COVID experience that I've been very fortunate in terms of my job hasn't been impacted, my partner's job hasn't been impacted. And so in terms of anxiety, there's probably a couple of things that I could pinpoint. We went through a settlement for an investment property just after COVID had hit, and we were worried about, would the banks, give us the mortgage, and then would we be able to get tenants and all that sort of stuff. But apart from a couple of sort of peaks, I haven't been overly anxious. But what I have noticed is with a lot of these presentations and things like that I've been tuning into, is a guilt for not being anxious, making me anxious.
Yep.
Is that normal?
Yeah, so guilt is interesting because there's two things you can experience. So guilt is about a behaviour that you may have done that you feel guilty about, right? So guilt, versus shame. So can you just tell me a little bit more? Is it more you're feeling guilty about what? What was the particular thing?
It's more that I'm hearing stories about a lot of other people who've been obviously a lot more impacted by this whole situation.
Yeah.
And for me, I haven't really felt moving into a work from home basis or anything like that particularly difficult or a significant change that I've had to try and come to terms with. But then hearing all these other stories, maybe it is more shame that something's not, I'm not connecting with the situation the same way that other people are, and is my reaction wrong?
Yeah. So shame is I am bad. There's something wrong with me. So it probably is more guilt, though. There's something wrong about the way I'm not feeling the same way as others, so I feel guilty. So I think it's more guilt than it is shame. This is I am bad. It's a bit like survivor's guilt, in grief, where, a situation's happened to someone else and you feel empathy for them, but you're traveling okay in some respect. So, and it hasn't happened to you. Well, that statement I said at the start that every time they kept saying we're all in this together, I'm thinking we are in it together, but it's a completely, we're all on different boats, right? So yeah, it's the same storm but different boats. So that's probably what you're talking about, is you're in it, but you're on a different boat to someone else. And when you notice someone else has probably maybe had it more difficult or whatever it might be, and then we compare ourselves to others, there comes the guilt. Yeah. But so that's a judgment about self. So I guess judgment about self causes more guilt, and that's inner critic. So it's what is it is for you. There's no normal way to be in this, right? So you're on your boat. This is what's happened for you. This has been your experience. It's different to someone else's experience. Yeah. And we're allowed to feel however there's nothing wrong with feeling different about it, but it's a different, you're not feeling bad, but I think it's more feeling the survivor guilt, someone else is maybe worse off and whatnot. Because it's been very polarizing, actually. Jessie, there's been people that have had, smoothly sailed through the whole lot, and they said, business as usual, pretty much, not much has changed for me. And then the other polarizing side's been everything has changed. So, yeah.
I can connect to that, Jessie. Not a lot has changed for me, and I feel when you watch what's going on, and at the start of all of this, I was like obsessed. I couldn't stop watching the telly. It was hours and hours and hours of it, and I remember seeing the queue and the people lined up at Centrelink, and the absolute devastation, and feeling, oh my God, feeling so horrible. But I like the way you sort of paint the picture, I guess, Rachael, that, same storm, different boats. Yeah. So I understand what you mean, Jessie. Yeah. Anyone else want to share? We've got plenty of time. Please go, Heather.
Yeah, I just thought I'd add to that even though some people may not be impacted, say financially, you might still be able to continue to work. There are lots of other things that you are missing out on. So that's, being able to see family and friends, attend weddings, funerals, those sorts of things. So, things have still shifted and things have still been taken out of our control to a certain degree. So, it's impacted everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Heather, because when I was saying at the start of the presentation, the map is here of what you thought might happen, and the ideal is here, and there's a reality gap. And I noticed for some people that, let's say some people are more introverted by natural default, they get energy by being by themselves. Some of them haven't been impacted as much as those people that enjoy being with others more and extroverted. So absolutely, there's definitely there's a grief and loss of what was, and and depending on the person and their situation. Absolutely. Yeah,
that's a great point you made, Heather, and thank you, Rachael. Yes, because I'm a people person, and as much as I love this, I love it better when I can see you face to face and enjoy your company, and we know what it feels like being together. And my husband calls me the holiday queen because I had to cancel 2 holidays, and I feel guilty saying this, but it's affected us in so many different ways. Absolutely. I didn't even see my own sister that lives in the same town as me because she was high risk. And so so many people I work with. One of the girls at the office, her first son was getting married, and that was a no-go. Other family members, and I felt one of our beautiful clients, he passed away, and he would have easily had hundreds of people at his funeral. It was not meant to be. So many other ways other than financial of people being impacted.
Can I just say that as somebody who has worked from home for the last 4 years, even for people working from home, there's been a significant change, which I hadn't realised until it happened, because we're talking here, an hour and a half. Normally, in the other normal, I would perhaps go to a meeting and I would spend about an hour and a half in the car. And I didn't appreciate that hour and a half actually stimulated the more relaxing side of the brain. I was able to listen to music in the car. You would, as you said, you go and talk to people physically. Now I found that I was having a meeting, and then I was tired at the end of the day. Quite simply because I didn't have that break in my routine. And we now have a meeting, and then another meeting, and another meeting, and it's piling on the pressure all in the same day without that break.
Yeah, very much so. Rachael.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good point, actually. It's we were talking actually, Tracy and I, before the meeting around exercise too. So there's a lot more sitting, so there's not, you know, we don't have as much movement, which is not great anyway, is it, for us getting online and our, you know, the new, as they say, it's the new smoking, isn't it, sitting? So it's, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some convenient things about sitting in the one place and joining people, but no, it's not the same as getting in your car and traveling to a meeting and seeing things, because there's some sensory things about that too, right? Lots of sensory things. Yeah.
It can also be called Zoom fatigue.
Yes, absolutely. That's the other thing, is a lot of people have been experiencing zoomed out. They've been experiencing a lot of like not laryngitis. They've thought it's laryngitis because you have to work harder on a screen to actually look at the cues, and much harder than you would in the room.
Michelle here. Hi. Just following from that point. I see a neurologist at the moment for something else, and she's a specialist in migraine. And since the start of lockdown, her consultations with patients who are suffering migraine has gone through the roof, because a lot more of her clients are experiencing migraine because they are in Zoom meetings, and their screens aren't correctly configured at home. But not just that, it's related to Zoom fatigue, and it can be a trigger for those people who suffer migraine.
Yeah, that's a good point, Michelle. They've had an influx in people turning up to the optometrist and also, you know, people have probably seen the glasses that they've had, sales in terms of the blue light and whatnot. But it's still that, it's also the focus on the screen for so long and without breaks, as we were saying earlier, is not healthy. And the migraines, there's a whole host of things, isn't there? Plus not being exposed to vitamin D outside and being indoors there's a list goes on, right? Yeah.
And it is a different focus on the computer, because my role is seeing people on a day-to-day basis, and all of a sudden when you get online, it's almost like you've got to show that you're listening, like physically. Does everyone feel that you can't just sit here like a mute, like you've got to be engaged, because you don't have the tactile stuff. You want that person to feel that you're listening, you're empathizing, you're communicating. And I find that takes extra effort. But I was chatting to clients a few weeks ago that are in Cairns, and he was funny. He said, at the end of all of this, we're all going to have to go to AA's and Jenny Craig because we're all drinking and eating too much. I thought that was a bit funny, but anyway.
That's avoidance for coping. Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Whatever works. My husband says he's drinking more scotch now than ever. It's not my fault.
Rachel, I have another question. Is there a way to mentally reset? So when COVID first hit, we were all sort of told go and work from home. In my head, I was really strong about trying to maintain as close as possible like routines that I had in place before work from home sort of was forced on everyone, where I still didn't want to lose my body clock, so I was still getting up at the same time every morning and just sort of starting work a little bit earlier, finishing a little bit earlier, trying to put in times to like get up and actually go and eat breakfast away from the computer and go for walks and things like that. And I've almost felt like I've had a bit of a fatigue with routine almost, where I've noticed now that I'm snoozing the alarm a lot more. I'm making breakfast and quickly hurrying back to my computer. I'm not taking those breaks to get out in the fresh air. And it is very, almost having those routines in place is becoming a bit tiring. Is there any way that you can sort of mentally reset? And I think it's almost like going on a diet. Like, you come off the diet and then you got to try and work yourself into starting again.
Yeah. And which is quite normal, right? So the good thing is, well done for having so much structure and routine, because that's great. So the base stuff obviously is important. So, but if you're wanting a reset, I mean, I'd be thinking, because you're sitting down a lot if you're doing this sort of work, you would need to be like, I guess I'd be asking yourself, your body in the morning, how am I? Am I feeling hyper aroused, anxious, agitated, or am I feeling really sluggish and slowed down? So again, the idea, the reset is about trying to return ourselves back to our window of tolerance. Yeah. So I think it's really important to ask our body in the morning, what is it for me? Where am I traveling? You know, do I need that walk? Do I need that movement just to get me online a little bit? The other thing with feeling really exhausted, that's what I'm talking about with reverse culture shock. It is this exhaustion feeling is very, very at the moment universal, right? Unless it's to do with the biological factor, which is to do with your, you know, iron or whatever, and if you've had that all ruled out. The reality is this is the phase, because we're entering in, you know, from the 12th of March or whatever the date was until now, 24th of June, we're now nearly getting into it. It's not quite chronic, but it's beyond our resistance in terms of our stress response, and that's where exhaustion enters. Okay, so if anything, I've been encouraging a lot of people if they could take some break from their work if it's possible, because a lot of people haven't had, and we can't always go away, of course, but just to switch off and have some time, because people are doing longer hours at home, I've noticed, with working from home, just because their home office is there. So switching, if you're able to take some breaks from your work, that would be a good idea. But otherwise, I'd be suggesting your base, asking your body in the morning, you know, hyper, you know, do some mindfulness, or hypo, go for a walk or get yourself back online in some respect. And the other factor not to ignore is sleep, because of the amount of screen use. You know, when you look at a screen for 30 seconds, your visual cortex dances for 45 minutes. All right. So we're having this huge
Say that again.
30-second glance at a screen, 45 minutes dancing of the visual cortex, right? So that's back here. So that takes a fair bit of time for that part of our brain to settle, right? We've been looking at screens for now, you know, nearly an hour and a half. Okay, there's a fair bit of visual cortex activity going on beyond this session. Okay, so it takes a bit of time for that to then wind down as well. So reducing screen use away from work screen use, listening to, you know, audio books, listening to podcasts. We need to reduce our screen use, because then the impact on sleep, a lot of people are also having sleeping problems is what I'm noticing, because of that increased visual cortex activity. It's taking them longer to get to sleep, or they're having poorer quality sleep. So sleep is a really essential part of resetting for mental health, very important. So we usually can get by with 1 or 2 nights being a bit dodgy, and then by the 3rd night, it's the reset function. So that looks like, you know, devices off nice and early, you know, environment nice and comfortable. We call this sleep hygiene. So if you look up anything on sleep hygiene, which is cleaning up your sleep routine. If you need relaxation, again, depending on what your window of tolerance is saying of a night, you know, some relaxation. And then trying to aim to get up at the same time every day, they say, for 5 days. So despite if you feel like you haven't got to sleep till 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, get up at the same time every day for 5 days. And then on your weekend, don't oversleep beyond 1 hour past your normal wake up time, because then you get into jet lag. Yeah. So I hope that helps. And then when you do get up in the morning, go outside for natural sunlight for at least 10 minutes, because the melatonin production, you know, benefits from that in terms of that sleep-inducing chemical. So some people also been taking, I've noticed, increases in melatonin supplements because of this poor sleep, which I think is related to then the screen use and the visual cortex, and it's all interrelated. Yeah.
Hands up who's having trouble with their sleeping. Hands up who's a good sleeper but isn't sleeping too well. I'm a great sleeper and I haven't been sleeping too well, and it's exhausting. It's horrible, really, to be honest.
Waking from about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and getting up and studying sometimes because I think I might as well, if I'm awake, I might as well do something. But it is frustrating. I was going to say, Rachel, thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, you're welcome, Meryl.
I love the pooch. Yeah, I think that's great, and also just having some worry time, just putting that aside. I thought that was really, really useful as well. And I think the other thing you said was the stories we tell ourselves, and is it actually true, and would it stand up in a court of law? because I think certainly I confess to having some pretty nasty internal dialogue sometimes, and I think that's really good. You know, where's their and would it stand up in court? And
Thanks, Beryl. Yeah, that other part about the full stop, I think is important as well. You know, just shutting it down as just stating something as a fact, rather than the comma, inner critic chiming in with adding extra. So I think that's important, just to state things as facts for what they are, rather than the embellishment of what inner critic continues with. Yeah.
I thought that was powerful too, Beryl. I thought that was great. But with the pooch one, I kind of missed all of that. Does everyone, are you able to just quickly elaborate on that one?
Sure. Sorry, I went pretty quick. So POOCH stands for, it's a problem solving model. So P is for problem. So what the problem is. It's actually good to use with children as well, because, you know, they might be saying, well, what do you want? What do I have for lunch today? What's the problem, right? So what are the options? You know, listing all the options. So that's every single option you can think of. You know, I can have a sandwich, I could have KFC, you know, listing everything. The next O is for outcome. So outcomes is the outcomes of each option, meaning the pros and the cons of each option. So what would be the pros and cons of having a sandwich, the pros and cons of having KFC. And then the next one is C for choose. So now looking at, you know, obviously your pros and cons. And the other thing is, when you're choosing, you're not just looking at your pros and cons, you're also, for us as adults, we're considering our values and what's important to us in our life. We choose one that makes the most sense for us to try, with no guarantee it's going to work, of course, because we don't have a control agenda, but we can try, you know, one that seems to be, that, you know, through that decision analysis. And then H is for how will it go? So how do you think it'll go? If you choose a sandwich for lunch over KFC, how do you think that will go? Oh, well, it's not as yummy, but, you know, it might be healthy for me. Okay, well, let's have a sandwich and see how that goes. And if that didn't work, we'll go back and choose something else, another option. Yeah.
I know my son will want KFC.
KFC, I think around lunchtime, I think. Of course.
But I might work through this pooch with him. I might work through this with the kids. I think it's priceless. That's great. I might actually put all of those like the base and the pooch, put them in an email. I think that might be a nice way to sort of summarize
those. If you want some handouts, I can send you them. I've got
that. Would be great. Yeah, that would be great. I'll just pop that down. So okay, it's my clock's only saying 18 past. We've got time for maybe 2 short, 1 long questions.
I've got a question.
Hi, Kaylee.
Hi, Dylan. Thank you, Rachel. That was really, really great. I'm actually, I've been meditating for 20 years on and off, and I'm doing some study in mindfulness and meditation. So I'm very much a control type person. I like to try and control things. And I just want to know if you've got any, because I'm listening to you going, I do that, I do that, I do that, I do that. And hand on my heart, I do that. So at the moment, COVID has really affected me. I'm a single parent. The place of employment I work at is in training and development, and we have nothing on our books. My boss has said to me, be prepared, you won't have a job in October. And I'm freaking out about what my life's going to look like from October. So as much as I meditate many times a day, I actually talk to people and my friends about putting commas into their day versus full stop. So being aware and how we can be aware and being mindful and all those things that you already brilliantly talked about. And I know at the moment I'm overcompensating. So I'm putting my hand up like I am here now, and I'm feeling guilty about it, going, I should be writing a blog for work, I should be doing this, because I'm doing 1,001 courses to go, I need to be really fabulous so that somebody in October is going to employ me. So I'm aware of it, but it's just that, and it's about the acceptance. Like last night I went to bed and I just went, you need to accept it. You can't change it, accept it. But I can guarantee you 4 o'clock every morning, and I'm a good sleeper, I wake up with surges of adrenaline, just going, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So it's that whole intolerance of uncertainty, and I've read so much about it but actually implementing something for myself to just really accept it and relax, I can't, because I can't get my head around not having job security. So it's all about financial security, and I do. And when I meditate, I do think about where am I feeling it in my body, trying to let it go. I'm asking you for a magic pill that you can't give. I needed to blurt that out to go, I wonder what your thoughts are.
Yeah, great.
Sure.
Thanks. No, thanks. That's great. Well done for you for doing all your courses and everything too. But yeah, I guess you're thinking, so just be mindful of that. You know, we talked about that, the struggle with the struggle, and you know, when your control agenda is high, you think I'm not doing enough and I need to do more. So I guess slowing the process down a little bit. So, and which mindfulness helps you with, right? To try to be in the here and now. I think for you would be looking at, talking about the triggers. Remember I was talking about right at the end where Viktor Frankl's little quote came in.
Yeah, I've read this book. I've actually just read this book. Yeah.
So between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space we find our freedom. Okay. So, if you're wanting freedom in that space, so if you think about what the trigger is, it's October potentially won't have, as you said, they need to be looking for something else and trying to better yourself. I'd be tagging all the feelings that are coming up for you around October. And what does that mean for you? So even though that's ahead of now, we're in June, and we're not quite in October yet. What are the feelings? Tag all that. Ask yourself, what are those feelings that are coming up for me about the trigger? And does this relate to any other time in my life where I've felt like this? So am I being double triggered or triple triggered by something? And what is the story my mind is telling me? Because your mind might be telling you the story of imposter syndrome. So that's a mindset trap. Like, there's plenty of other people out more qualified than me. Why am I going to get a job, right? So, and you said overcompensated, but imposter syndrome feels like I'm like an imposter. I'm not going to be employable, right? So then finding if it's imposter syndrome, then writing down your body of evidence. What is it that I bring to this world? Okay. What is it that I provide? Yeah. What are my gifts that I provide? Yeah. Okay. If it's fear of failure, like what if I fail and I don't get a feeling like I don't get a job? Or is it fear of success even? What if I do get a job and they don't like, and then the imposter stuff comes in. So I guess I'd be trying to drill down a little bit about what is the mind, what's the story your mind's trying to sell you? So is it failure? Is it imposter syndrome? Is it I'm not good enough, which is imposter syndrome essentially. So if it is that, find your body of evidence. So your brain needs to know what is it that I bring into this world. And then going along from that, if I didn't get a job, so let's look at the worst case scenario, would you survive? What would that look like? Confront that. Yeah, what would that look like? Would it mean I need to make, so confronting the worst fear and actually sitting with that and what that would mean. Okay, that's important for our brain to actually go, oh, okay, because when stresses occur, they kind of just occur in fragments in our mind, and our job is to try and get all of these little fragmented bits and try to integrate them into a whole and give them meaning. And when we can give it meaning, our brain's like, oh, okay, I'm a bit more reassured now. Does that make sense? So trying to give some meaning. So obviously I'd be asking you why you're doing so many courses. Do you need to do them? Obviously it's extra.
Asking myself the why.
So what's that about? Is that imposter syndrome?
It's trying to control it all. And I understand imposter syndrome, but I think writing it down might help, because so I can tell you the magic pill you've just given me is fragments. So as I have sat and gone, what's the worst that can happen? Are you going to be homeless? No. Are you going to starve? No. But I think I need to pick up all the fragments and write it down.
And the feelings part, don't skip the part in between, because a lot of people don't cover how they feel about something. They have the intellectual response, oh, I'm sure I'll survive. No, how does it feel? What does it relate to? And what story is this promoting? And is that story evidence-based or not? So That's really important, because that story is normally a negative core belief about self, and it's usually like you're defective or you're not good, and it's the old stories we all have. Yeah,
it's all highlighted. I'm not good enough. And I can intellectualize it and say, well, I am good enough because everything in black and white says that I am, but it's just about the belief. But that's okay. I won't hijack the session anymore. But
no, that's fine. No worries. That's fine.
Thank you, Kayleen, for being so honest and open and feeling safe enough to share.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I did feel a little bit vulnerable. I sort of sat back going, I can't say it. And I actually just read a quote on Brené Brown earlier today, and I went, just say it. Just
Actually, mentioning Brené Brown, can I show you guys something that I'm going to take out of my diary?
Can't read it, Tracy.
10 guideposts on wholehearted living, Brené Brown.
Okay.
And one of them is, I'm working on this one, the perfectionism one, self-compassion, letting go of that, and letting go, where's the control one? Anyway, so letting go of what people think, letting go of perfectionism, letting go of numbing and powerlessness, letting go of the need for certainty.
She calls control armoring up, putting your armor on. That's what Brené Brown calls it. Are you armoring up, right? You're not allowing yourself to be seen. Yeah.
Yes, we could talk for hours about these things, couldn't we? Very interesting. In the interest of time, we have 3 minutes. I want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you so much. I hope you've got something out of this. I hope that it has answered maybe 1, 2, or 3, or just made you feel good, just being, in a group of women again, just sharing and hearing each other. And if you walk away thinking, oh, it's not just me, well, I think that's sweet, because it always feels good that you're not alone. Thank you, Rachael, so much for your wisdom, your expertise, and your beautiful compassion, the way you present. Thank you so much. It's an absolute, we're privileged to have you as a WOW member, and thank you for your time today, because I know how busy you are and what you do. So thank you so much for providing your time to us. I will email everyone the details that I spoke about. Our next webinar is in July. I believe that emails have gone out, and I'm going to Dawn and Kayleen. Yes, thank you. I did email my VA. She does all this stuff for me, so I've emailed her to say whatever you posted on Facebook is not getting people the link, so I'm all over that. But just watch out for your emails. So we're having one a month. So August is the next one I'll be taking. And then there's September. I've just got to confirm all of those. But thank you. Thank you, everyone. And if you need anything, reach out. Okay? You're not alone. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Trace, can I ask you, what are you doing in August?
So in August is I'm actually talking about money mind games, so the mindset around money and the money stories we tell ourselves.
Oh, okay.
Really your relationship with money. It's not so much about the skills or anything specific about investing or cash, but it's going back to understand. I'm finding, and I've been talking about this for the last 5-6 years, and only now am I understanding how powerful and how important it is. And without this piece, nothing else really works. There's always roadblocks in every other piece unless we get this right. So it'll be quite interactive, and I'll be emailing out some worksheets prior to that.
So where are your links on that? Like, I only knew about this one because you actually...
Are you on my WOW Women database? Do you get the emails?
No. But
okay.
I'll page, like I'm on your Facebook thingy, but I don't get it.
Yeah, so what I do is I'm going to put you on there. So what I do is I email... Did you get that last email I just sent you before?
With the Zoom link?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
cool.
I didn't have that before because I'm going, computer literacy, Kayleen. Seriously, it's not that. But I had never received that Zoom link, so that's why I couldn't get on.
Yeah, so what originally happens is I've got a MailChimp account. Everybody's emails are on there, and I send out an email saying what it is, I'm going to put you on there so you will get it. But whatever my VA set up on Facebook just needs fixing, because obviously it's not providing the link. So I'll send that to you.
Yeah, I was just thinking there was a magical way to be on a Facebook webinar that I discovered yet.
Not that I'm aware of myself, to be honest, but I'll check that with her and she'll fix that for me.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Kayleen.
All right. See you, Trace. Thanks, Rachel.
Bye. Bye-bye.